Now, this time last year, Carl caught up with one of the UK's leading economists who was in Shropshire to deliver his thoughts on the state of the economy. Well, James Sproule from Handelsbanken has been back in the county again this month, speaking at a reception at Hencote in Shrewsbury to some of the bank's invited guests. Carl caught up with him and his colleague Sarah Rigby and started by asking what has changed in the last 12 months.
Gosh, I mean, a lot's changed. I think that a year ago we were expecting interest rates to be higher than they've had. We've had a peak of interest rates at 5.25%, and markets are going to expect that. And so, of course, inflation is starting to come down a lot. We were really concerned about that a year ago. Now we're seeing an end to that, and we're sort of looking forward because there's obviously new challenges that we're facing in terms of what's going on in the Middle East. Is that going to lead to a more bigger conflagration, and therefore do we start to worry about things like are energy prices going to spike back up? So far, not so much, but clearly, that's one of those imponderables that we're going to have to face over the next few weeks is, what are the implications of this renewed crisis?
One of the things that struck me from both your presentations tonight is just how dynamic the data needs to be at the moment because things are changing so quickly.
Yeah, things are happening very, very quickly. If we move back to July, the expectation was that the Bank of England would raise rates to 6.5%. And that quickly changed after the inflation data in September, which actually that's when we saw the unexpected hold on rates from the Bank of England. And now we're only expecting that we could well be at the peak. Again, as James said, our concern is really around what happens with the Middle East, but at the moment the expectation is that interest rates could well be at the peak, although we do expect they may remain high for some time to come.
I was going to ask you about that because the Middle East crisis was touched on a couple of times tonight, and that's just another imponderable thrown into the mixture, isn't it?
Oh, of course it is, yes. And I mean, if rolling the sort of time back to February 2022, or sorry, what are we, 24? February 22. Yes, so rolling the time back to February 2022, of course, we then had the Russians' invasion of Ukraine. That wasn't unanticipated. I mean, yes, by some of the CIA and MI6, but by the markets and the rest of us, not. And what's happened as a result of that, and the unexpected way in which, frankly, Europe was really good at got its act together very quickly on building the facilities to be able to take alternative energy supplies. That was a very positive thing. I think there's some positive things as well that have happened over the last few months and years. One of them is about employment. Now, unemployment is going up, but we're not expecting it to go up to anything like the levels that we saw, even just in the global financial crisis, where it peaked at just over 8%. We're thinking it's going to be under 6% at its peak. So that's a lot more people remaining employed, and I think it's a really good trend that we've seen, and ultimately will allow the UK economy to recover a little bit faster when we do see some sort of upturn, because people won't have to find a new job. They'll already be in a job, probably just increasing their hours, increasing their pay, and that's an easier thing to do. And companies themselves recover faster from that situation instead of having to find lots of new staff members.
I think that's one of the things a lot of Shropshire businesses will really chime to from what you said, because I know that there's a real recruitment problem in Shropshire, to be honest. People are trying to find skilled staff, or they're finding maybe that the staff that are coming for interviews are feeling they're in a position maybe to dictate terms to potential employers and feel they're in the box seat a bit. Do you feel that? Do you see that around different parts of the country?
I think we do see that around the country as there's been a shortage of skilled staff, especially with long-term sick, even from COVID. I think the main concern is around wage growth, that is still a concern, that we don't want to end up in a position like we saw in the 1970s when it escalates, that people are demanding more and more money, which pushes up inflation, and then people demand more money, and then it pushes up inflation, and you end up in a spiral. So I think that is a big concern.
But there are a lot of factors, aren't there, that are not typical factors that you would see. And you mentioned that you don't think we're maybe going to go into an actual recession at the moment. But there are a lot of factors that you wouldn't see in a time when the economy is maybe in a downturn anyway, aren't there, at the moment?
One of the factors, for instance, we see across the whole of the UK has been a ticking downward in house prices, and that's obviously something. 2/3 of the people in the UK are owner-occupiers of their own place, and the result is that when house prices start to fall, lots of people feel a little bit bruised as a result of that. Now, we think there's going to be probably about an 8% fall from peak to trough, and we're probably about halfway through that. That's in nominal terms, and ultimately you have to think, a year ago we were seeing house prices in the UK at an all-time high. And whenever you're at an all-time high, you have to ask yourself, when is the retracement? When is there going to see some sort of back to normal a bit? And we're seeing that. And actually, quite a bit more of that's also being achieved by inflation, because of course what we're seeing is if we see an 8% fall in nominal terms, we're seeing a larger fall because you have to add inflation to that. So more like an 18% fall in real terms on people's homes. Now, that's painful for many, but of course it also leaves homes more affordable for a lot of people, which is good. More people can climb onto the property ladder, which is a good thing. And ultimately, you look at the level that they were sitting at a year ago, and you have to say, well, that wasn't sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. People remember the good times more than the bad times, don't they? Or they get used to. You also talked about a whole generation has been used to, virtually zero interest rates. I remember when I bought my first property, I think it was within 2 months of that, Nigel Lawson had that day where he put interest rates up hugely. But there's a whole generation of people that don't even know times like that exist, aren't there?
Absolutely. I mean, from March 2009, what we have seen is we've seen, historically low rates, and therefore, we've got a generation who just expect almost that interest rates will remain low and aren't a risk to their business. What we're seeing now is the expectation that although we may be at the peak of interest rates, that we will see interest rates remain higher for longer. And that's not just a trend in the UK, we can see that in the Eurozone and the US as well. And this basically means that now there will be a cost to borrow money. But what's good news, to end on good news, is that it's great for savers because they will actually get a return on interest on deposits, which is a very safe way to invest your money.
And it gives people more of a value to what they're doing with their money, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
One final thing, James, because I think this is really relevant to Shropshire. I was interested when you were talking about the retail spectrum and how that's changing, particularly how retail parks, you were saying, have been faring maybe better than traditional high streets. And of course, here in Shropshire, if you take the big towns, Telford and Shrewsbury out, what we've got is a lot of market towns, traditional market towns that don't have out-of-town retail parks and are a little bit maybe worried about what the future holds. I'm wondering how much you think those towns have got to perhaps reinvent themselves for the future.
Well, I think what we've seen is so the way that the statistics are broken out, they look at high streets, shopping malls and retail parks. And it shows that retail parks have been the area which has seen the footfall come back post-COVID more strongly than the other areas. And the least return has been shopping malls. And ultimately, of course, what a retail park does is it's got a good mix. It's got a good mix of parking. It's got a good mix of the right kinds of shops and in terms of cafes and places you want to shop. It's got a good mix in terms of the green space. And so look at that. If you're that market town, look at that and realize that space is curated. That space is made tempting for people to come there. And you're in competition, effectively. And make it a really nice shopping experience. If you end up with a lot of vacant shops or charity shops and parking is difficult, etc., well then don't be surprised that people decide to shop online instead. It's just easier. So people want to go where they're loved and show them some love.
And have a USP, I guess, as well, isn't it? Independent traders versus maybe big chains and that sort of thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you both for your time. Really good to see you. I'll leave you to go and explore the rest of the cellar now.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you. Excellent. Great to be here as always.